Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. Speaking of authors, today we're going to have a great guest. His name is Ramesh Nyberg. He's a retired Miami Dade homicide detective who's seen it all, arresting those who commit the most heinous of crimes. Ramesh also has a new book out entitled Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective, and it's available on Amazon.com, and I encourage you to check it out. I'd like to welcome my guest, Ramesh Nyberg. Ramesh, how you doing today?
Great, Vic. Thanks for having me on.
No, pleasure's mine. I started looking into your career, and I was like, wow, this guy has been involved in everything from the cocaine cowboys to the Winter Hill mob. Please tell my listeners, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into writing.
Yeah, I mean, as far as getting involved in all those cases, I got really lucky, right? It was just the timing was right. I got into police work in 1979, just as everything was heating up, and man, did it ever heat up! And we were hopping for a long time down here. How did I get into writing? I always liked to write when I was a kid. It was just a nice outlet. I always enjoyed it. I think I had a couple of teachers in elementary school who really taught me to love words and the power of words. Right, words are powerful. So I got into writing, and then nobody told me to write. I would just write about everything. We'd have a softball game at the elementary school, and I'd write it like a sports article, and that kind of stuff. And so when I got into police work, I knew I would be writing about my experiences.
That's cool. What made you become a police officer? Like, what was your calling?
That's another tough one, and I didn't really realize it until much later. But I think I craved being in a place where I could learn more about people and I could help people. I mean, it sounds, it's the old thing, like, oh, I want to help people, right? But I really did. I enjoyed that. I liked being the person that people turn to, right, for assistance. Like, you go and you help somebody on a simple call in patrol, and they're grateful, and that feels good. And I think that's what a lot of us get into law enforcement for, is we like to be, it might be an ego thing, but we like to be the saviors. That's a rush when you can save other human beings and help them even in a small way. So I guess I wanted to do that. I didn't feel like I was doing that in my life at that point, and that offered an opportunity for me to help people. That really is the truth.
Well, take us back to 1979. So you graduate the police academy.
Right.
You go out into the street. What was it like as a young patrolman back then?
Well, it was rough. I started with a small department. It was basically this department it's tucked up in the northwest section of Dade County, and it's basically a ghetto. The entire town was a ghetto. Heavy inner city stuff going on. We had homicides, shootings. There was heroin dealing going on. This place was a mess, and so as a patrolman, it couldn't be a better place to get your feet wet, right? So. Yeah. I guess I would liken it to, I never worked in the Bronx, but I've heard stories, and it was like that. We were constantly going to violent calls, and I got enough experience in my first year there that most cops in other districts wouldn't get in 3 or 4 years. And that really was a baptism of fire for me. And that's when it started. And then it wasn't till about another year, maybe a year and a half or so, that I got interested in going to homicide and getting out of uniform.
Were you guys on solo patrol back then?
Yeah, we did solo. Sometimes we worked with a partner. It really was at the behest of the supervisor. If he wanted to put you in a 2-man unit. So sometimes we'd be in a 2-man unit. Sometimes we'd be riding alone.
Yeah, in the NYPD, you always have a partner in a radio car. Now, you can be put on a foot post where you're by yourself, but you can kind of pick and choose your spots on foot. With a radio car, you're getting directed to something. You know what I mean? And you're
Right.
only as good as your backup. Hopefully it gets there around the same time you do if the shit hits the fan.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the shit hit the fan a lot in that place. A lot. But, we were surrounded by county jurisdiction. So the county officers we were on the same frequency, and whenever they heard stuff go down, they would come and try and back us up if they were free. So we got to know a lot of the county guys, and you know, I went to a homicide scene one day and was watching the detectives work, and I went, man, you know, I'm going to go to another call. I might go to a burglary call or something. They're going to be working on this thing all night, and that's a challenge I would love to have. That's when I got, you know, that's when I got the bug.
That's when the light went on. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and then I spent, you know, I was in uniform for that was about 5.5 years in uniform before I went to homicide.
Yeah, they say every cop finds his niche, their specialty. Some guys just like being on patrol, and other guys want to go to a specialized unit. Some guys want to buy drugs. Some guys want to chase drug dealers. And it's funny, early in my NYPD career, I worked in plainclothes with another guy, and I knew he was going to be a homicide detective because the two of us were like, we got along really well, but we were totally different in our styles.
Yeah.
He was, and I'll say this about every good homicide investigator I've ever met. They're well organized. They're meticulous. They look at things very objectively, and they don't get sucked down rabbit holes, or they try not to, wanting to believe something even though the evidence is not directing them in that direction.
Yeah.
And this particular guy went on to a 20-year career in Bronx homicide. Now he's narrating Netflix series. So there's something we always used to say: homicide detectives talk to God.
That's funny. That's a good one.
So when I was doing research for this interview, I went to your old police department's website, and I'm looking at old cold cases. And I emailed you a list of old cold cases, and one of them came up, and you said, that one's in my book. So could you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's a case that is kind of still a thorn in my side because I wish we had solved it, but you know, you can't get them all. This was a really tough case. This was at a crane company. So they had this, you know, this big work site where they had cranes, and you know, they leased their cranes out to construction companies, right? And the people that worked there, the managers that worked there, their offices were these little trailers. You couldn't see this place from the road. So it's not like a group of robbers came in, oh, let's look at that. And, you know, you had to drive down some rocky little paths to get to this place. So this wasn't some random robbery. And this guy was the co-owner of this business, and he's found in his trailer with a gunshot wound to the back of the head, small caliber, 25 caliber, one casing on the floor. And we interviewed everybody in that business. Some of them several times, and nobody knew what was going on. And then eventually we started hearing things and seeing things, and his business partner, started acting really, really funky. And to make a long story short, we talked to enough people, and we believed that the business partner was the guy who set it up. We could never prove it. And over the years, I became friends, I guess you could say, with the widow. She would call, you know, in the beginning she was calling every day, and then her calls would taper off. And we would talk less and less about the case and more about her kids, my kids. And Vic, she called me every May 1st for 32 years until she passed away. Every May 1st, because that homicide happened on May 1st, 1986. And I got a call from her every May 1st. And it was something. She was a sweet, sweet lady, and she just passed away about 1.5 years ago.
That's sad. Did the business partners lawyer up and not want to cooperate anymore at a certain point, or?
Yeah, they didn't. It wasn't that. It's just they just stayed with their same bullshit story, and we just didn't have enough. We just could never tie him in to a firearm or track back that casing to any firearms. And man, we recovered 25 autos all over the place and tested them in our lab, but we could just never get the goods on them.
Yeah, that gun went in a river.
Probably, yeah. You know.
Do you remember your first homicide case?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That one was a piece of cake. You know, they give you a grounder, the first one, right? So, you know, that one was a domestic. The guy had shot his wife after a drunken argument, and I remember going into the interview room and I was all nervous because here I'm practicing my interview techniques, right? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get this confession. I can't wait to start working on this guy. And I walk in and I stick out my hand and I said, "My name's Detective Nyberg." And he shakes my hand and he goes, "I'm Benjamin and I shot my wife." "All right,
Oh,
Benjamin, you and I are going to get along just great, man. Keep up the good work. You're doing great there." So
how about that for a confidence builder, huh?
yeah, so that one was that was a slam dunk. But yeah, none of them were ever as easy as that after that.
What was the longest investigation you worked on to bring a killer to justice?
Wow, we that's a tough one. I think we worked on one case for 4 years. There was another one we worked on for was another one that went dormant for about 8 or 9 years before we closed it. We got a tip that broke it wide open, and we ended up closing it. So there's been a few, and then there was one that was 17 years, and we reran the evidence. It was pre-DNA, and we reran some of the evidence and got a DNA profile and got a hit in CODIS, and things just steamrolled from there. So there's a few.
And that's the thing. Like nowadays, I see these newspaper articles popping up all the time about homicides being solved 5, 6 decades ago, and
Oh,
sometimes
it's
even the
incredible.
killer is deceased.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we first started using DNA. First case was like 87, 88, something like that. You needed a drop of blood about the size of a quarter,
Right.
you know, and now one dead skin cell, that's all you need, and you can get a male, female. You can get hair color and all this other stuff from it. It's incredible.
And now they're doing genealogy where they're going through these websites and finding out, well, someone's relative could be related to the killer, and then they'll reach out to them and say, "Do you have any cousins that grew up in the Bronx?"
Exactly,
And then they work
exactly
from
right.
there. How
Yeah,
many
it's
of
a
your
different
cases were
ballgame.
solved by DNA?
By DNA, I never really stopped to count. I'm sure somebody did. I want to say probably just a handful, because by the time I went to cold case, it was 1992, and in cold case we stopped. We didn't handle fresh cases coming in. We just worked on the old cases. But we did solve, I would say, three from DNA while I was there.
And what people don't realize is with homicide detectives, part of your job is to investigate suspicious death, and a lot of times there's suicides. And suicide, those are odd cases because you never really know what the person, or a lot of times you don't know what the person's motivation was, or sometimes they do things to make it look like it was something else. I'm sure you came across a lot of unusual suicides in your time.
We handled a lot of suicides, and yes, they are probably some of the most problematic cases that you can handle, because a big part of it is when you're dealing with families. It's hard enough with a homicide. With a suicide, a lot of the time they don't want to believe it.
Right.
They simply don't want to accept it. Um, and one of the big problems with suicides is you've got victims who, once they've made the decision, they're suddenly all buoyant and happy and acting, not depressed anymore. And of course, the family's looking at that and they're going, they were happier than we ever seen them. They wouldn't have killed themselves. And I tell you, I saw it, Vic, on just about every suicide. It was the same pattern, you know, and then they end up killing themselves. But the families were always saying they looked happy. They looked like they had come out of it. Well, what had happened is they'd made their decision.
Decision. They knew
So
whatever was causing them pain would soon be over.
exactly right.
What
Those
was,
are
do
tough.
you have any unusual suicide ones that really
Oh
took you a
man,
while
do
to
I.
figure out?
Yeah, I mean, one comes to mind, and I also wrote it in my book extensively about that particular case. It was a woman, talk about families being a problem. This is a woman who shot herself 6 times. Now, you try and sell that to the family. It took it took a couple of days of one of our blood spatter experts coming out to the scene, doing extensive blood spatter analysis on the stains we had on the wall where this woman had found in her bed. Um, no forced entry to the apartment. She's got a handgun laying on her chest. She's got 6 wounds, 4 below her breast and 2 above her breast, all contact wounds. She's got gunshot residue all over both hands. Okay, heavy gunshot residue on both hands. We worked a lot with the medical examiner who said, listen, those 6 wounds, none of them individually were fatal. It's almost as if she knew where to shoot. I mean, this was crazy. And he said, but untreated with no medical help, yeah, she slowly bled to death, went into paralysis and bled to death. And it took a while, but I finally convinced one of the brothers. What was happening was she was she was in a depressive state. She started to come out of it. She started giving away all her things. She went around. Her family was spread all over Florida and Alabama. She went around giving away jewelry, giving away her things, hugging people, and they're all sitting there confused, like, "What are you doing?" And so that was, that pattern was pretty clear. And then she left some things for her best friend that were pretty indicative that she was heading out.
What kind of handgun did she use?
It was a revolver. It was a small 6-shot revolver. And it was a remarkable case. I'm telling you, remarkable. The blood spatter guy that did that case used slides. He made photos and slides, and he taught that case all over the country.
I was going to say, yeah, that's something. That's something that's going to be in training.
Yeah, but that was the most difficult case I think I've ever handled.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And like you said, good luck selling that to the family because they don't want to hear it. And 6 shots, who could do something like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're a rookie cop during the Mariel boat lift,
mm-hmm.
and you grew up in Miami, in the Miami area. How did that change South Florida?
Oh God, it changed it drastically. When I was growing up in South Florida, I was a kid in the 60s, mid 60s, late 60s. I was a little kid, and Miami was a quiet place. I mean, nobody really thought about crime. I mean, I'm sure there was petty crime here and there, but nobody thought about people getting murdered in the streets and bodies showing up. And 1980 comes around, and I'm telling you, that was just chaos. The Mariel boat lift, a lot of people don't realize, the Mariel boat lift started on the same weekend that we had a large race riot. So we had the Liberty City riots in May of 1980. The guy's name was Arthur McDuffie, black gentleman who was killed by several white police officers. And when they were acquitted in their trial, all hell broke loose. And that was the same weekend where the first wave of immigrants was coming in from Cuba on the Mariel boat lift. And I'm telling you, it was total chaos. It was very hard to keep track of people and what was happening. And we were on Alpha Bravo, which is, that's where you're on a 12-hour shift, right? You get Alpha shift to 7A to 7P, and then, the entire department's on Alpha Bravo. So the Bravo shift is 7P to 7A, and we were on that for about 2 weeks, in riot gear and everything else. And yeah, that was some exhausting stuff right there.
Yeah, and then you become a homicide detective. I think you said 1985. So you're catching the tail end of the cocaine cowboys era where they're just shooting themselves. What was it like? Like, you guys were probably running out of the office every day. You probably didn't have a chance to catch up on your paperwork sometimes.
It was exactly like that, Vic. We had about 55 detectives total in homicide for the county. And we were handling that's our department. We were handling about 30 to 32 homicides a month. We were getting one a day. Now, throw in the suicides and the accidentals, which, they're coming in the naturals. We had to go out on unattended naturals. You got guys going to court. You got guys testifying in trials. I mean, we were literally running from scene to scene a lot of times.
Yeah, guys go on vacation, guys going out line of duty injury, and it's like you just can't keep up. It's just a wave of paperwork coming in, and You got to
Yep.
catch another one where normally you'd get a couple of days to work on this thing, and now you got to put the last one on the back burner and run to this one or be the number 2 one, help your buddy out with the case. I can't even
Exactly.
imagine what that was like.
It was crazy. I mean, again, it was kind of reminded me of my rookie year on patrol in that inner city neighborhood. Same kind of thing in homicide. I got a baptism of fire there when I got there, and worked a lot of different cases and worked on a great squad. I mean, you get very close to these guys very quickly, and we saw a lot together. We did a lot together, and you know. We were young, man. We'd go out and have some drinks and, till 1 a.m. and be back at 6, to start working again, and that was some crazy time.
I think about like going 24 hours, 36 hours when I was younger. And I say to myself now, like at 58 years old, there would be
Oh my
absolutely
God.
no way I could do it.
No, there's no way. Yeah, there were several times when we were going around the clock on these cases. I mean, you can't, you get a tip, you get a witness telling you what happened. Hey, here's the guy, he lives down there. You can't go home.
Right. We
You
got to
know,
go get this guy.
it's time to go get a search warrant. Then you serve on the search warrant. Before you know it, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, the time went by fast, but then, you get home and you're just burnt. You're exhausted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like you have jet lag. Food doesn't taste right. And you go to sleep and you're kind of waking up. You're in and out of sleep because your mind is
Yeah,
still going.
exactly. Yeah.
What percentage of the homicides would you say were drug related? Because I think you told me it was like you guys were averaging about 600 a year. What percentage would you say were drug related during that era?
Yeah, that 600 number included the city of Miami. So I worked for Miami Dade, which was the county, which we were larger than the city of Miami. But when you total all the homicides in the county, I think we had 621 one year. I think it was 81 or 82. Um, yeah, I would say back in that era, there were probably 60 to 70% of them were drug related, either on a large scale or on a street level,
Right.
right? Because you had a lot of street, you know, with back then it was called freebase cocaine, which preceded crack cocaine. It's kind of pretty much the same stuff. People smoked it, highly addictive, and there was so much cocaine in the streets, and it's a cash business, so there's a ton of cash in the street, right? There's millions of dollars floating around, and so there were drug ripoffs everywhere. People were ripping off potential sellers and killing them and taking the money. Um, so you had that, and then you had on the local and the street level, you had guys ripping each other off or selling bad dope or fake
Fighting
dope and
over a
stuff like
corner.
that. Exactly, fighting for territory. And so, yeah, I mean, it was either drug related or domestic related. There were very few that were not falling into those two categories.
And for those of you that saw the documentary Cocaine Cowboys, Centac 26 Lieutenant Raul Diaz famously said, "We went from who did it to who is it." How often did that happen when you guys would hit a dead end? Because with victimology, if you know who the victim is and their family and everything, you can start working backwards. If you know nothing about this person, they've got their fingerprints come back to nothing. How often did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it did happen from time to time. Not a lot, but because as you said, you've got to identify your victim. That's your first lead. You're not going to go anywhere unless you identify the victim, because from there you can start working on their circle of people and understanding their life a little bit. Yeah, we had a case that was still unsolved to this day, where body parts were washing up on the beach, and at first it was a male body part, then female body part. So there was these two victims, and over the course of about a week and a half, different body parts were washing up. And finally, we got a head, I think the male head, and the medical examiner was able to determine that the dental work was not done in the United States. So we figured these people were probably killed in another country, dumped at sea, cut up and dumped at sea, washed up in Florida, you know, to join all the other corpses. So that one, everybody was working on that one too, because that thing was a big media uh, uh, extravaganza. The media was all over it. There was a radio station in Miami that was running a contest. Call in and predict what the next body part's going to be, and you win, $100 or something. It was
Oh
ridiculous.
my God. How many bodies was? Do you know how many bodies?
There were two bodies. There were
Okay.
two bodies on that case. Yeah.
Were you around? I know you would have been relatively new, but were you around for the Dadeland shooting?
I was not. I was in when the Dayland shooting happened. That was in '79. I was actually in the police academy, I believe, when that happened. Yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of talk about that in the police academy. What were you guys carrying when you first hit the street?
We were issued Ruger 6-shot revolvers.
Yes, us
Yeah.
too.
Stainless steel Rugers. I forget what model they were. And then
357 or 38?
38.
Yeah, we had
Yeah.
38s. At my job, we had dump pouches. And
Mm-hmm.
then my class, we went to speed loaders, which
Yeah.
if you've ever
Right.
tried trying to line up those 6 shots to dump in the cylinder, then probably about 94, 95, we rolled over to the 9 millimeters.
Yeah. That's just pretty much the same thing that happened with us.
Talk about outgunned, especially what was going on down there.
Oh yeah. Well, and then at the FBI learned a horrible lesson. In 1986 with Dove and Grogan. That happened in 1986 down here when there was that big shootout with those two bank robbers, and two agents were killed, and the agents they were carrying wheel guns, man. They hadn't come over to automatics at all, and these characters they were shooting at had mini 14s and shotguns and everything else. So that was a
You,
terrible situation.
you were at that crime scene, correct?
It was.
Could you kind of set it up like how it happened and the story behind these guys?
Yeah, I mean, from everything we learned, these guys were some very aggressive bank robbers. They seemed to be pretty much fearless. They went out and they realized, I guess, that they needed cars that couldn't be traced back to them, so they stole the cars and they killed people to steal the cars. They went out and killed this guy who was out target shooting out on the edge of the Everglades. Went up and killed him and took his car. And they ended up using it in a bunch of their bank robberies. And they did several bank robberies all around the south end of Dade County before they finally collided with the FBI. And that was a horrible day.
The unusual thing about those two guys, everything I've read, they enjoyed killing people because they could have just stolen the cars. It's easy to steal
Exactly.
a car, especially back then. These guys would find people out in the middle of nowhere, target practice, kill them, and take their car. And then both these guys were suspected in murdering their wives and making it look like an accident. And two of the
Yep.
robberies they pulled before they killed those FBI agents, two of the robberies they killed armored car guys. So,
right.
I mean, it appears to me these guys just enjoyed killing people. It was the robbery was good, but I think they also, I mean, they were just bloodthirsty.
They were. There's no doubt about it.
Did you ever work on any of the Griselda Blanco murders?
Sure. I mean, everybody did it at one point or another before we even knew who Griselda was, right? So this was a time when, we'd get assigned a case. Hey, Nyberg, you got a case. We got a body in the trunk. And you go there and it's a drug-related murder. But we didn't find out how many of them actually were attributed to Griselda until much later. So, yeah, we got a lot of those.
Were you involved with that Turnpike shooting with that guy, El Loco?
I remember that. No, I was not involved in that case. I was not.
So we were talking earlier through Griselda. You were involved with George Rivi Ayala, who was basically the star of Cocaine Cowboys, if you want to call him that. Could you share the story you shared with me about early in your career and then what happened? You come full circle with this guy?
That's a crazy story. I was a uniform cop. I was in my second year. Yeah, about my second year. And a buddy of mine had come down for dinner. I'm driving him back to his place. It's about 11 o'clock at night. My wife's in the car in the back seat. And we come to an intersection at Lejeune Road and US 1, pretty big intersection. And we start hearing all this rapid gunfire all around us. And we're looking around. I'm literally ducking down in the seat. My eyes are barely above the dashboard. And then we slow down as we get through the intersection, and the shots have stopped. We look back and we see this Mercedes full of bullet holes. We turned around and we walked up to the car with our guns out. And here's this guy in the passenger seat, just Swiss cheese, man. He's just shot to hell. And And so we called the city of Miami police. It was their jurisdiction, and they came down, took our statements. So that was 1981. About 19, 20 years later, I'm in homicide. I'm in cold case. Sergeant Al Singleton walks up to me, and he drops a police report on my desk, and he says, "Do you remember this?" And I start looking at it, and that's that case. It was that shooting. And I said, "Sure, I remember that. I think I could have gotten shot. Had I been traveling a little faster, I might have gotten shot." And he goes, "Well, the guy that did that shooting is a hitman for Griselda Blanco. He's here in the office. Come on, I'll let you meet him. He's flipped and he's cooperating. He's working for us." So that's when I met Rivy, and I helped Al several times take Rivy to the state attorney's office. We took him to the dentist several times. He had a tooth problem. And so I got a chance to, spend quite a bit of time with him in the car, talking to him and whatnot. And, he was like some hitmen are. You would never really suspect what he did. He talked very normally, nonchalant. He wasn't some animal that's drooling, and stuff like people think the hitmen look like. He looked like just a normal character.
Do you think he got a raw deal in the end?
No, he didn't get a raw deal. We got a raw deal from him because if you know the story,
Yeah,
he was doing all that sex talk with the
that's a
state
good
attorneys,
point. Yeah,
the prosecutors' secretaries, and so that really undermined the case. Now, whether he did that on purpose, because that was he was the star witness against Griselda, so our case against Griselda suffered because of him, because of what he did. But he, I don't think he got a raw deal because I think he's still in prison.
oh yeah.
Griselda skated,
Right.
not skated completely, but she didn't get near what we wanted her to get. But she got hers in the end. Karma comes around and bites you in the ass, right? She got deported to Colombia, which is probably the worst thing in the world that could have happened to her, because there were plenty of people that wanted her dead. And within about a year, she was dead.
Do you think he came clean with every homicide?
I think he did because we spent a lot of time matching it up and corroborating what he was saying. The stuff he was saying made a lot of sense. We were able to identify other people that were involved, and it all made sense. I mean, he admitted to shooting people. I mean, he didn't really mitigate his own involvement when he gave those confessions.
At one point, and again, it's television or a documentary, but at one point he said he went up to New York and did a couple of hits. Did that come up?
I don't know. I don't remember. He didn't tell me that. I mean, I wasn't present for all of his
Right.
conversations and all of his confessions, but I don't know what became of those cases.
Speaking of Rivy and cold-blooded killers, my younger brother and I were having this conversation the other day, and my younger brother was honored enough to guard a Colombo family hitman, Greg Scarper, on Rikers Island. And we were just having this conversation, and because I had run into a lot of guys like this, and we were talking about, have you ever been with someone that just kind of looks right through you? Like their eyes are soulless, and it's like they're sizing you up. They would kill you in an absolute second if they could. Have you ever come across, I mean, all killers are capable of taking, but they're just predators. They don't value human life, and you can see it looking at them.
Yeah, I think there were times when John Martirano looked like that.
Really? Okay.
Although Martirano was the hitman for Whitey Bulger and them. Although, and then there were other times when he was very soft spoken and just like a guy that you could have a beer with. But when he talked about certain things, his eyes would kind of darken. And I mean, he dropped the hammer on one of his good friends, John Callahan.
Yeah.
They were friends, and he even said something one time. We were in the car with the marshals. We're taking him out on location, and he started looking at the floor kind of sadly. And one of the marshals, I'm sitting next to John, and the marshal's on the other side. The marshal goes, "John, what's the matter?" He goes, "I liked Callahan." So anybody that could kill just because that's what they had to do, and do it without hesitation. The way he described the murder to us, he did it without hesitation. You know, he picked Callahan up from the airport, and he put his bags in the back, and then he shot him in the back of the head.
Yeah, because I want to get into that, so I'll just set it up for our listeners. So, in the late '70s, early '80s, Whitey Bulger and the Boston mob is skimming from World Highlight. I think it was from the parking lot attendants is skimming money, and the director of World Highlight is this retired FBI agent by the name of H. Paul Rico, who was Whitey's handler at one time before John Callahan. And what winds up happening is Roger Wheeler purchases World Highlight, and he's starting to do forensic accounting, and he knows he's being short on the money, and he's talking to his security director, who tells Whitey, this guy's got to go. So through this guy John Callahan, who's an accountant there, who's also in with Whitey, Martirano and this guy Joe McDonald go out to Oklahoma. They get from the FBI agent, they get this poor guy's tea time, and as the guy's leaving the golf course, Martirano and Joe McDonald shoot him in the head, and they leave him there. And then Whitey says, you know what, I don't think Callahan is going to stand up. And he's got Martirano living in Florida, and Martirano's on the run from Boston, and Whitey paid basically for Martirano's existence to live in Florida because he was an insurance policy against the New England mob. Because Martirano was such a capable hitman, they were always afraid that if they moved on Whitey, Martirano was like the boogeyman, would come out of the shadows and start whacking them. So it was a big thing, and we were talking about this. It was profiled on Unsolved Mysteries. What was the crack in that? Oh, this is what I wanted to ask, and I don't know how true this is. Was there also a secretary or an administrative person, it was a woman, that worked for World Highlight that died of a mysterious circumstance where she was strangled? Supposedly she was wearing a scarf, and it went down the garbage disposal and broke her neck. Does that ring a bell?
I heard some rumor about that, but I don't think we were ever able to substantiate that case because otherwise that would have been a big
Right,
part of
right.
our investigation. I don't think that ever went anywhere. I think that was just a rumor because I don't think we ever knew her name. But you were talking about the motive and how Wheeler was looking into the business. The other part of it that really came out later that the DOJ task force really found this out when they started going through all these letters and all these documents. They were trying to buy, they meaning Winter Hill, the mob was trying to buy World Highlight from Wheeler, and he refused to sell. So that was another part of their motivation. Not only will this guy not sell to us, but now we're in danger of being found out. You know, he's gonna audit us, and the feds are gonna be in here, and that's why they killed him. And then there were two other people that knew about it. One of them was a guy named Brian Halloran up in Boston. He was the first to go after Wheeler, and then Callahan was the third.
Yeah, there's a lot of bodies over that game highlight.
There sure were, sure was, and and Rico, there are people to this day that'll tell you that Rico knew nothing about it. There's no way, he didn't know about it.
You were actually the
Martirano
one that
told
put
us,
cuffs on him, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was there when I was heading up the arrest team in Miami Shores. Early one morning, we went and arrested him on our warrant. So actually kind of a funny thing that happened that morning. We knocked on the door, and there's like 10 of us there. And his wife answered the door, and she knew right away who we were. And we said, we got an arrest warrant for your husband. Where is he? She called. She says, I'll get him. So she calls him. He comes out. He's kind of wide-eyed. He sees us all, and we told him, you're under arrest, and we handcuffed him. And so she's sitting next to him on the sofa, and he says to her, get me something warm to wear because it's going to be cold where they're taking me. And she nudges him, and she says, you want me to get you a highlight jacket? And he looked at her like, bitch, this is not the time for this kind of nonsense. I mean, it was a funny moment. It was everything we could do to stop from cracking up.
That was my next question. Did you laugh?
Oh, I definitely smirked. I mean, we were looking at each other like, okay, that's a classic line right there. There was a guy that wrote a book about there's several books written about this, and I forget his name now. But he told the story that Rico came to the door, in his. I know what it was. The book is called Hitman. It was about John Moderato's life, and it was a journalist up there in Boston that wrote the book. He says that Rico came to the door in his highlight jacket. That never happened. That never happened.
That was an amazing case that went on for
Oh
many,
yeah,
many years to crack. Were you involved at all with John Conley?
yeah. I actually I booked John Conley into the jail down here when we after we arrested him, and he was very he was very cordial, um, and we chatted, and I actually fingerprinted him, which I hadn't done in years, and I botched one of the fingerprints, and I apologized. We had to do a couple of them over, and he was very cordial. Um, yeah, that was very much towards the end of my career, and as a matter of fact, he went to trial after I retired, and and then Whitey was caught well after I retired.
Did you have any dealings with Flemmy?
Yeah, yeah, we interviewed Flemmy up in Otisville prison up in New York. Um, isn't Otisville in New York? Yeah, that's
Yes.
upstate New York. That's where we were. So me and a couple other guys from the task force, we went up and interviewed him after we took our statement from Martirano. We took a statement from him, and then we interviewed Kevin Weeks, which was a guy that did a lot of the nasty work, buried the bodies, things like that. So yeah, that was an amazing case. I really was. I mean, I learned a ton about Boston, about the culture up there, about the whole thing. It's so different than
Yeah.
Miami, so different.
That's Steve the Rifleman Flemmy, who was basically Whitey Bulger's partner. He's soulless. I mean, everything I've read about him, and I mean, he was involved in killing two women, one of which was his stepdaughter he was having an affair with. I mean,
Right?
there was no boundaries with this guy.
No, no, he was out of control, and he was very verbose. I mean, he talked. We actually had to rein him in a few times because he would go down all these rabbit holes, and he couldn't stop talking, and we kind of worried about how he was going to be on the witness stand. You know, it's going to confuse people, but he ended up get toned down a little bit.
Did you have any dealings with Cadillac Frank Salemi?
No, Salemi. I think Salemi was already serving time by the
Right.
time I got involved. Yeah,
And you said Martirano, he was like both ways. He was like he flipped a switch. He could be sentimental, looking down at the floorboards, going, "I like John," but at the same time, you
hmm
said you knew he was a killer just by the way he carried himself.
yeah. I think he was numbed to the whole thing. He seemed like a guy that just didn't hardly had any emotions except for that one moment. But again, when we talked to him, he was very forthcoming. He was very he was very helpful. He was polite to us, and the only thing he ever said that insistent about was, "I don't want the FBI in the room when you guys talk to me. I don't want them here." And that was a big battle that we had with the FBI up there. They wanted to be at the table, literally, right? They wanted to be a part of the whole thing, but the there was such a division between the DOJ task force and the FBI task force. Um, there was literally bad blood there, and so they just they weren't they weren't trustworthy in a lot of people's eyes, and they had denied a lot of things. Not the entire department. I don't want to paint the whole. I've worked with
Right.
a
No, I
lot of
understand.
great FBI agents, great guys, but I'm saying that particular crew, and they were divided within their own office too. Right, there were a lot of guys that had wanted to have nothing to do with Connolly and Ring and those guys that were involved with Whitey and Stevie. Um, so that was another thing that was very foreign to us, was dealing with something where we're just not going to let a federal agency in the room while we're talking to these guys.
Unbelievable. Did you work on any of the homicides from the Miami drug kingpins, Willie and Sal, Las Muchachos?
I didn't work directly. I mean, we may have handled a couple of those homicides, but no, there was another team that was pretty much involved with those guys. We were working other things while
Unique.
the Willie's hell happened.
Yeah, what was unique about those guys, they really weren't known as killers until they had a federal case pending, and then basically their attorneys put the witness list out in the papers, basically signing a death warrant, basically open season on the witnesses, and they started getting killed like crazy. And the ironic thing is, one of them got 20 years, and the other guy's doing life. They've never been convicted on any of those homicides.
That's right. Yeah.
I find that
Yeah, I know
amazing.
that it is. It really is. Well, the average, I think the average person, you've got a lot of citizens that are listening to you think it's harder to convict people in court than one may think.
Right.
It's not a slam dunk.
State court.
Um, well, yes, correct. State court. Yeah. Yes, that's true. You know, and not all the evidence gets in.
Right.
Not all the witnesses get to testify. There's a lot of rules of evidence that kind of narrow down what you can present to a jury.
And you were an investigator that worked on the infamous Miami River cop murders. Can you share that?
Yeah, I mean, peripheral stuff, right? When I got there, they had just gotten the case. The three bodies floating in the river. It would turned out to be the county jurisdiction. And later on, started to identify these guys, these Miami cops that were involved in drug ripoffs. And you talk about blatant stuff. I mean, they were doing this in uniform. They were making it look like raids, but they end up pushing these three guys in the river, and they drowned. These guys couldn't swim, so that's how we got the case. I later found out one of the cops was a academy classmate of mine, and that was disturbing to find that out. And we heard a lot of things. I mean, a lot of debriefings and a lot of confessions and things, over the years on that case. And the investigators found out that during one of the raids where they're about to go on this boat in uniform, and one of the cops says to the other, "What if the county shows up? This is county jurisdiction." And the other cop says, "Start shooting." I mean, it defies your imagination to think that there could be guys wearing badges doing this stuff, but they did.
And while these guys were out on bail or even from inside a jail, they conspired to kill a witness and dump the body on a federal prosecutor's the hood of her car.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
talk about not getting it. It's over.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the NYPD's had its fair share of well-publicized police scandals. We had the mafia cops and a lot of things. Dowd. Did you work on any other cases where cops were involved in a homicide?
Well, I worked with a guy in uniform who seemed to be a very nice guy, very outgoing, gregarious kind of character. And later he becomes he becomes a juvenile detective. He goes to juvie, and he ended up picking up some 15-year-old girl and taking her out in the woods and raping her. And when we made the case against him, he fled the jurisdiction. He ends up in Nevada, and Nevada was working two murders on him out there. He had a torture chamber. He was taking hookers to this torture chamber. He killed two hookers out there. So, you think you know people and you work alongside them, and I mean, like that guy was
Evil.
out of control. Yeah, very, very much so.
Speaking of evil, I was researching more unsolved homicides during your time with the county. What I came across and I found interesting was there was a large number over like a 10, 15-year period of females being killed in their dwellings. Did you ever suspect there was a serial killer or serial killers in that area targeting women?
Yeah, and I'm not sure which cases you're referring to, but there was a couple of cases down in the South End that were similar in the fact that these women were actually, they weren't killed in their houses. They were abducted from their houses and killed
Okay.
somewhere else. And I identified a guy that I believed was responsible for one, if not two of them. And I believe he was a serial killer in the making. And I believe he had killed at least two women before he got convicted on a rape case and sent to prison. And I interviewed him in prison, and he didn't confess, but he did talk to me, but he didn't confess. So that was one of those ones where we got very, very close, right?
Yeah.
But we just didn't get enough probable cause to push it over the edge.
I bet you know the answer to this. Do you know how many homicide cases you solved?
I know that, well, so as a lead investigator, I was the lead investigator in, I think, probably 80 or 90 cases. And I would say we solved around 75% of those or 80% of those. I'm just kind of estimating. If I sat down and, and charted all of them out, it might be different. Well, the advantage we had, and I'm sure you're aware of this, we worked on a team concept. Mm-hmm. So you didn't work a homicide by yourself. You always had at least two or three people on the squad. You had a squad of 4 guys and a sergeant. And so you always had somebody to bounce ideas off of. You had a second set of eyes. We were able to knock out leads simultaneously, and divide up the work and work efficiently that way. And that I think is a big part of being able to solve cases. On TV, you see, guys working cases by themselves, and
I know.
It just doesn't work that way.
Now, I probably know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. Are any of your former clients on death row?
On my cases, no. On several cases that I worked on with my partners, yeah, several on death row.
Anybody notable that our listeners would know?
Probably not. They're not like famous cases. Okay. We had a sergeant in our department that killed his wife, and serving a life sentence, and he worked in homicide for a short period of time.
Oh my God!
His name was Ted MacArthur. I don't know if you came across that name, Ted MacArthur. And he was married to a wonderful woman. We all knew her, and she was a firearms instructor in corrections in the jail. She's a firearms instructor. So he calls one day saying, "Oh my God, my wife shot herself in the head, and suicide, or accidental. He didn't know." And we started working the scene, and we could tell from the blood spatter and a lot of different things that there was something really funky about this. Plus the fact that this guy was having an affair with a Miami Herald reporter. His squad members knew all about that. That was a terrible embarrassment to the department.
Oh, sure.
And
plus you knew the woman.
Yeah, it was sad because she was and they had 2 beautiful little kids, and just by chance the kids happened to be up in Massachusetts visiting their grandparents when this happens. And that woman did not shoot herself in the head. She was right-handed. She's got a gunshot wound to the back of her left side of her head. And he says it happened accidentally. She was a damn firearms instructor.
Yeah.
Okay. You know those people.
Yeah.
They drill
Serious
safety
people.
Yeah. First thing you do on the range for half an hour is safety.
As the rest of us are like, oh, come on. But they're right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going for your training, and it's like, oh, how much longer do I have to hear this safety instruction course? But it is for your own good.
Of course. Yeah.
Just cops have other things on their mind. They want to get their cases solved. They're thinking about overtime, and they're making us do this training. But at the end of the day, it's well worth it.
Well, on that MacArthur case, like a lot of people that are narcissists, right? They think they're smarter than everybody else and that they're going to get away with it. And think about, he's worked with some of the best detectives that you'll find anywhere.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's going to outsmart them. So,
Not an intelligent individual that should have been leading men and women in that unit.
exactly.
Do you have a homicide that haunts you the most?
Haunts me. You mean in terms of like not being able to solve it,
Yeah,
or
that baffled you.
yeah, I think the Jack Wilcox case,
Okay.
which I got on May 1st, 1986, shot in the back of the head. I kind of know. I'm pretty sure who did it. It was his business partner. We could just never get enough to prove that case against him. Um, he he uh, he started acting really really strange and was saying strange things to people, trying to throw red herrings around and about the victim, and none of it made sense. Um, and he stood what he thought he stood to gain the other half ownership of the business. And turns out he didn't read the fine print in the contract well enough. The business went to the victim's wife, half ownership, and she had to take it to court to win that battle. And when we discovered that, it was like, okay, this is about as big a motive as you can ever want. He wanted the guy out.
Was she afraid for her life?
No, she wasn't. She was a pretty courageous woman, and she never, if she was afraid for her life, she never really showed it. She used to tell me, Nyberg, tell me where to be in court, tell me who to talk to, I'll be there. You know, um, and it was a shame. He seemed to be a pretty good guy. Wasn't involved in anything, wasn't involved in smuggling or anything else like our suspect was trying to allude to, but that never happened. And that, we would develop kind of a relationship with the next of kin. It's a hard thing to describe. It's like they get attached to you. You make the next of kin notification. You walk them into the courtroom, and you kind of guide them through the whole process. And there's this attachment. And she used to call me a lot, trying to find out what's happening in the case and do you have any suspects and that kind of stuff. And then the calls tapered off, and I said this happened on May 1st. She ended up calling me every May 1st for almost 35 years before she passed away. And by that time, we were talking about each other's kids. We used to exchange Christmas cards. Just a sweet old lady. And I always felt bad that I could never solve the case, but I was always upfront with her, and I would never. If we didn't have anything, I would tell her, "Hey, we just don't have anything right now."
Is the business partner, to your knowledge, still alive?
No, he died of cancer, and apparently did not die very peacefully. So there's something there.
I watch a lot of mob true crime podcasts, and a couple of the guys said that a lot of the killers, for whatever reason, tend to die of cancer. So I don't know if that's God's way of getting back at them, or
Yeah, there's something called karma, and it's real. It's real.
I couldn't agree with you more. Ramesh, I want to thank you so much for doing this interview. I mean, you've got an impressive career. I am going to pick up your book. I am going to read it. I'd like to have you back on. Can you please tell our listeners the name of your book and where they can find it?
Thank you, Vic. It's called Badge, Tie, and Gun: Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. It's on Amazon. You can get it as an ebook, or you can get it as a paperback. It's on BarnesandNoble.com and a bunch of other outlets. So you can find it on, I think, Apple Books and other places like that.
You have another book out, don't you?
Yeah, I wrote one before Badge, Tie, and Gun. I wrote one called The 10 Must-Haves to Be a Great Detective. It's a small, kind of a manual, kind of a how-to thing. And by the way, the title doesn't infer by any means that I'm a great detective. I worked with a lot of great detectives, and I learned everything from them. But I actually wrote it as a guide for private investigators, because I opened a PI agency, and I was kind of training a lot of these guys on various things, and I decided, why don't I just turn it into a small book? So
Are you still a licensed private investigator?
yeah, still am.
So where can our listeners in South Florida, in case they need to get a hold of you?
Right. Nyberg Security and Investigations. Still in business.
Ramesh, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Vic. It was a pleasure.
Mine too. I also want to thank everyone else for tuning in, especially my friends in Sanford, Florida, home of the auto train, Taylor, Michigan, Prince Frederick, Maryland, Marengo, Illinois, and Moncks Corner, South Carolina. If you work in law enforcement and have an interesting criminal background and would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you enjoyed the content, check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic Ferrari Like the Car, where you can preview all my books for free, including NYPD, Law and Disorder. And once again, check out Ramesh Nyberg's new book, Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. It's available on Amazon.com, and I will post the link to my YouTube and my Facebook page.
Thanks again, Vic.